Did you know tiny Iceland once went to war with Britain? Overfish? Not once. Not twice. But three times between the 1950s and 1970. They're called the Cod Wars, and while no full battles were fought, these naval clashes got intense with ships ramming each other, nets being cut, and tempers flaring on both sides. And in the end, Iceland won. Every single time. This is the story of how a nation of just 200,000 people stood up to the Royal Navy and won control of its future. To understand why this mattered so much, you need to know one thing. Cod wasn't just food for Iceland, it was survival. In the 1950s, over 90% of Iceland's exports were fish, and cod was the biggest catch. Without fish, Iceland's economy would collapse. Britain, meanwhile, had one of the largest fishing fleets in the world. For centuries, British trawlers had fished in the rich waters just off Iceland's coast. It was a massive industry, and many British towns relied on it. So when Iceland decided to protect its fish stocks and economy, it set the stage for a showdown with one of the world's most powerful navies. In 1958, Iceland made a bold move. It extended its fishing zone from 4 miles offshore to 12 miles. For a small country, that was huge. Britain refused to recognize the new limit and responded by sending Royal Navy warships to protect its trawlers. Iceland wasn't intimidated. Its tiny Coast Guard boats went after British trawlers, cutting nets to stop them from fishing. What followed were dozens of tense encounters at sea. Patrol boats clashed with warships, collisions damaged vessels, and crews got into shouting matches. It was David versus Goliath, and somehow, David held the line. After months of pressure and escalating tension, Britain eventually backed down and accepted the 12-mile limit. Round 1 to Iceland. By the early 1970s, Iceland wanted to push things even further. In 1972, it extended its fishing limits again this time from 12 miles to 50 miles. Once again, Britain refused to recognize it. Once again, the Royal Navy escorted its trawlers. And once again, Iceland pushed back. But this time, Iceland had a secret weapon: net cutters. These devices were designed to slice through the massive nets of British trawlers. In some encounters, a single Icelandic patrol boat could disable an entire British fishing operation. The Royal Navy didn't take that lightly. British warships rammed Icelandic patrol boats, injuring sailors and damaging ships. At the height of the conflict, Iceland even threatened to withdraw from NATO, a serious threat during the Cold War, when Iceland's location in the North Atlantic was strategically vital. Faced with that kind of pressure, Britain gave in. The 50-mile limit was recognized. Iceland had one round too. You might think Britain would have learned its lesson, but in 1975, Iceland extended its fishing limits yet again, this time to 200 miles. That was a radical move at the time, and Britain wasn't going to let it happen without a fight. The Royal Navy deployed as many as 37 warships to protect British trawlers. What followed was the most dangerous of the Cod Wars. Icelandic and British ships rammed each other more than 50 times. Coast Guard vessels risked everything against much larger ships, cutting nets and blocking trawlers. In one clash, the Icelandic Coast Guard even fired live shells near British ships, the closest the Cod Wars ever came to open combat. Once again, Iceland threatened to close the NATO base at Keflavik, a key outpost for the U.S. during the Cold War. NATO couldn't afford to lose Iceland, and the pressure mounted. In 1976, Britain finally gave in. The 200-mile limit was recognized. The tiny nation of Iceland had won round 3. So what was the result of all this? For Iceland, it was a total victory. By controlling its own fishing waters, it protected its economy, preserved its cod stocks, and secured its future. The 200-mile fishing limit it established became the model for modern international law, what we now call the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. For Britain, it was a bitter loss. Entire fishing communities that had relied on Icelandic waters collapsed, and the Royal Navy, once feared worldwide, had been outmaneuvered by Iceland's tiny coast guard. But for the world, the Cod Wars changed the way we think about oceans and national resources. The Cod Wars might sound ridiculous at first, ships ramming each other over fish. But behind the comedy was a fight for survival, identity, and sovereignty. And in the end, tiny Iceland showed the world that even a small nation could stand up to a global power and win. All over fish. History is wild. If you liked this story, check out my other videos on history's weirdest wars and strangest leaders. Subscribe for more snack-sized history.